The Monster of Partridge Creek by George Dupuy. Mr. George Dupuy, the well-known French writer and traveler, who has made many explorations in the polar regions, here relates a most experienced him in the frozen steppes of Alaska. Mr. Dupuy, whose good faith is beyond question, takes full responsibility for his narrative, which is, it may be noted, however remarkable, and in no way contradicted by known scientific facts. The drawings which accompany this article have been made from sketches and descriptions supplied by Mr. Dupuy. The story which follows is in no sense a romance. I wish in the first place to ask the readers of the following narrative to believe that I am in no way attempting to impose upon their credibility. Concerning the amazing spectacle I am about to describe, I report nothing but plain facts, however astonishing and apparently incredible they may seem at first glance. Precisely as they appear to my own eyes, they am possessed of excellent sight. And to those of my 3 companions, all 3 white men, without counting the 5 Indians of the Kluakuk tribe, who have their camps on the shores of the River Stewart. The following are the names of the 3 ocular witnesses who are ready to testify to the truth of my assertions. The first is my hunting companion for many years, Mr. James Lewis Butler, banker of San Francisco. The second is Mr. Tom Lamoa, miner from McQuestion River, in the Yukon Territory. And lastly, the revered Father Pierre Lavernois, a Canadian Frenchman and missionary at the Indian village of Armstrong Creek, not far from McQuestion. In the course of 10 years rambling in the 4 quarters of the world, it has been my lot to witness a great number of amazing spectacles, and the strange experience of which I speak became no more than a vivid recollection when, a few days ago, on January 24th, 1908, the following letter reached me at Paris. It came from Father Lavernois, who passed his life with a massive flock 600 miles northwest of the Klondike. I give it here word for word. Armstrong Creek, January 1st, 1908. My dear son, the trader of McQuestion has just stopped here with his train of dogs and sledges. He has a hard journey from Dawson, by Darlow, Flat Creek, and Dominion. I expect to receive by him, in another fortress, fresh provisions and news of the outside world. Today is the first day of the new year, and I want this letter to express my affectionate wishes for your health and happiness. I hope it will give me the pleasure of receiving you under my humble roof, here at the other end of the earth. I will not believe that you will let your old child in the great north leave his old carcass to the Indians, who will some day or other make his coffin out of branches, without seeing him once more. I have received your book, the reading of which has given me the greatest pleasure, by the way. You are wrong in regard to that poor fellow, John Spitz. Alas, he is no longer mail carrier of the Yukon district. He died, poor fellow, at Eagle Camp, soon after you departed, not having survived the wound he received from the bald-face, which you remember. Talking of ferocious animals, will you believe me when I tell you that tens of my Indians and myself saw again, on Christmas Eve, that horrible beast of Partridge Creek passing like a whirlwind over the frozen surface of the river, breaking off with his hind feet enormous blocks of ice to the rough surface? His fur was covered with hoarse frost, and his little eyes gleamed like fire in the twilight. The beast held in his jaws something which seemed to be a caribou. It was moving at the rate of more than 10 miles an hour. The temperature that day was 45 degrees below zero. At the corner of the cutoff, it disappeared. It is undoubtedly the same animal that we saw before. Accompanied by Chief Steinschein and 2 of his sons, I followed the traces, which were exactly like those which we all saw, Limmer, Butler, you and I, in the mud of the Moose Lake. 6 times, on the snow, we were able to measure the impressions of its enormous body, the same size as we found it before, almost to the 20th of an inch. We followed them to Stewart, 52 miles, when the snow began to fall slightly and blot out the traces. It was on receipt of this letter that I decided to write the story of my own experience, which it recalled so vividly to mind, and of which it afforded a striking confirmation. The station of my question, that far-off corner of the strange country of the Yukon, where the 8 months of winter are so terrible, but the short summer so marvelously beautiful, was on 4 occasions my chosen retreat during the 8 years that I've known the North. A friend of mine in San Francisco, Mr. Butler, who had come to Dawson City in order to purchase gold mining concessions, had promised to join me in order that we should go hunting together. I was taking my coffee one afternoon in the veranda of Father Lavenue's cabin when all at once I heard someone whistle from the farther bank of the river. A bark canoe, paddled by 2 Indians, was coming up the river in the shadow of the trees. Butler was with them. "My dear fellow," he said, smiling as I met him, and endeavoring to hide his visible agitation, "I have something very strange to tell you. Do you know that prehistoric monsters still exist?" I broke out laughing, and together we returned by the small path which led to the father's house. When Butler had taken off his muddy boots and was ensconced in a comfortable seat, he began to recount his story as follows. Leaving Gravel Lake, where I arrived on Tuesday evening, our last stage was the mouth of Clear Creek, where I knew that you would send to meet me. Traveling was frightfully bad. 40 miles of marshy country. At last, at nightfall, I descended the hill, and had the pleasure of seeing Grant's cabin, which was lighted up. Grant was at home, and a good supper was waiting for me. Early the next morning, yesterday, he came to tell me, in his reserved and silent manner, that 3 fine moose were feeding behind the plateau of Partidge Creek. After swallowing a hasty mouthful, all 4 of us, Grant, your 2 men, and I, started out from the hut. We made a wide detour. At the top of a hill, where we had hidden ourselves, all of us stretched full length on the ground. We perceived, a short distance in the valley, near a moose lick, 3 enormous moose, moving slowly forward and quietly browsing on the moss and lichens. All at once they gave 3 simultaneous bounds, and one of the males giving vent to the striking bellow which these animals utter only when they are hunted or mortally wounded. The 3 went off the mad gallop towards the south. What had happened? We decided to approach the spot where the animals had taken fright so suddenly. Arriving at the moose lick, a spot about 60 feet long and 15 wide, we saw on the mud, and almost on the level with the water of the lick, the fresh imprint of the body of a monstrous animal. Its belly had made an impression in the slime more than 2 feet deep, 30 feet long, and 12 feet wide. 4 gigantic paws, also deeply impressed, had left at each end of the main imprint, a little to the side. Footprints 5 feet long by 2.5 feet wide, the claws being more than a feet long, the sharp point of which being buried themselves deeply in the mud. There was also the print, apparently of a heavy tail, 10 feet long and 16 inches wide at the point. We followed the tracks of the monster in the valley for 5 or 6 miles, and then, at the ravine of Partidge Creek, a place which the miners call a gludge, they ceased suddenly as if by enchantment. How the monster appeared to us. The next day, at 5 o'clock in the morning, Father Lavenue, Butler, Lemoine, a neighboring miner hastily summoned, myself and 5 men of the tribe, crossed the river Stewart in 2 canoes. Neither of the first 2 guides, who were overcome with terror, nor the sergeant of the mounted police, who received our story with skepticism, nor the letter carrier would consent to accompany us. All day long we searched, without result, the valley of the little river McQuestion, the flats of Partidge Creek, and the country between Barlow and the lofty, snow-covered mountains. At last, towards evening, tired out after having toiled for a long time through the great marsh, we lighted a fire at the top of a rocky ravine. The sun was setting. Lying by the fire, we let our eyes wander over the glittering expanse of marsh which we had just traversed. The tea was boiling and everyone preparing to dip his tin cup into the pot, when suddenly a noise of rolling stones and a strange, harsh and frightful roar made us all spring to our feet. The beast, for which we had been looking, a black, gigantic form, the corners of his mouth filled with blood-stained slime, his jaws munching something, I know not what, was slowly and heavily climbing the opposite side of the ravine, making the large boulders roll into the valley as he went. Struck with terror, Father Lemoine, and myself tried to utter a cry of fright, but no sound issued from our parched throats. Unconsciously, we had seized each other's arms. The 5 Indians were crouching down with their faces against the ground, trembling like leaves shaken by the wind. Butler was already rushing down the hill. "The Dinosaurus! It is the Dinosaurus of the Arctic Circle!" muttered Father Lemoine, with clear teeth. The monster had stopped scarcely 20 paces from us, and resting upon his huge belly, was staring motionlessly at the red sun, which was bathing all the landscape in a weird light. For a full 10 minutes, provided to the spot by some strange force which he could not overcome, did we contemplate this terrible apparition. We were, however, in full possession of all our senses. There was not, and never will be, in our minds the least doubt as to the reality of what we saw. It was indeed a living creature, and not an illusion which we had before us. The Dinosaurus then turned his immense neck, but did not seem to see us. His withers were at least 18 feet above the ground. His entire body, from the extremity of his yawning jaws, which were surmounted by a horn like that of a rhinoceros, to the end of the tail must have measured at least 50 feet. His height was like that of a wild boar, garnished with thick bristles, in color a grayish-black. His belly was plastered with thick mud. At this moment Butler returned to us. He told us that he thought the animal weighed about 30 tons. Suddenly the Dinosaurus moved his jaws, visibly chewing some thick viscid kind of food, and we heard a sound like that, the crunching of small bones. Then, with a sudden movement, he raised himself on his hind legs, and giving an utterance of a roar, a hollow, indescribable, frightful sound, and wheeling round with surprising agility. With movements resembling those of a kangaroo, he sprang with a prodigious bound into the ravine. On the 24th, Butler and myself, have taken 2 days' rest, started for Dawson City, for the purpose of demanding from the governor 50 armed men and mules. Here my story ends. For a month we were the laughingstock of the Golden City. The Dawson's Daily Nugget published an article about me, which was at the same time flattering and satirical, entitled "Arrival of Poe."